Hi, I'm Ursula Dubosarsky and I'm a writer for children and young adults. I've written about 60 books and I've just recently been appointed the new Australian Children's Laureate. Since I was born, I loved books. I was a little bit late learning to read. I didn't learn to read till I was in about year one, but even before I could read, I simply loved holding books, turning the pages, looking at the pictures, making up the stories, pretending I could read. And so then when I learned to read, it just seemed this sort of completely magical thing that all these books had all these, secret stories that I felt written just for me, and I could go to the library and pick out any book and just be in a different kind of, almost a different mind space with any book I picked up. So I was just one of those very fanatical, voracious, natural readers, and I can't imagine life without books. Well, I guess because I love reading so much, it's just, I really want other people to enjoy it as much as I do. I think the thing about reading is it's sort of sets you up for your whole life. You know, with the Laureate, the slogan of the Laureate is read for your life. And I guess I'm not just saying children should read and nobody else should read, but children are at the beginning of their reading adventure, and if they start to love reading when they're children, they will actually read for their entire life. So it's a sort of fantastic moment for children to really throw themselves into books and discover and explore all sorts of books until they find the sorts of books that they really want to read, and then they'll never stop reading. Look, I think primary school children are pretty good readers. You know, they learn to read and they read pretty well. I think when the reading starts to kind of slow down is when towards the end of primary school and the beginning of high school. And I think that's a real pity, because you need to keep reading to be a good reader. It's like, when you learn to swim, if you can swim one lap, that's very good. But to save yourself, if you fall overboard, you're going to need to swim more than one lap. You're going to have to be able to swim, 10 laps. And so I think you have to look at reading as something that you have to keep doing all your life, so that the world of books is always open to you. Otherwise, that door closes. And you'll look at all those books and you'll think, oh, I can't read them. And that's like this entire universe. The door is closing to you. And so you've really got to keep on reading, even, as you get older, particularly, we all love our phones and messaging and all of that. But I think you have to really say to yourself, I want to be able to be a good reader. I want to love reading and I want to keep reading. So I think probably we all need to really think about it a bit more than maybe we used to before, the internet. I think we probably have to think a bit harder about how important it is for us all to keep reading. Well, I lived in my school library when I was at school. It really felt like my second home. And I went to a few schools and I can picture all of those libraries, and I would walk in from the playground into the library and I would just feel my tension levels drop. I felt I was in a safe place, a free place, and a place where there was just a kind of endless opportunity for exploring in my mind. And I can't imagine a school without a library. And I think if we want our children to keep reading, and I think we all do, I don't think there's anybody out there who doesn't think it's important that our children read, then I think we have to have libraries in the school that are open. It's no good having a library that opens up twice a year. The library has to be open every day and freely open for children to go in and explore the world of literature for themselves. Like some people will say, oh, the books are on the shelf and the kids will never borrow them. Well, they'll definitely never borrow them if there are no books on the shelf and if there's no library. And so I think it just has to be available. The opportunity to read has to be there for children to read. And the library is like the number one opportunity for reading. Well, I think it's a complete mystery. I think sometimes it seems from what you read that to me, it's a misunderstanding of what a library is. A library isn't just a place where you go and do your project and you find out information. Like one of my kids' schools, they renamed the library the Information Centre. Well, most people go to the library. If you're talking about public libraries, most people, the vast majority of people that go to the library go to borrow fiction. You know, libraries are temples of the imagination. You know, they're not just there to be useful when you need to know something. They're there to give you access to this world of the imagination. And I just don't understand. If we want children to be good readers, then you have to have a library in your school, because it's also the school saying to the children, reading is important, reading is fantastic. It's like a symbol of how important reading is. And I think it's hard if the school seems to say to the children, oh, we don't need a library. I read electronic books from time to time, but of all, if you're looking at public libraries, the vast majority of items borrowed are paper and cardboard books, and particularly with children. Like the sales of electronic books in both adults and children are not big. You know, it's not taking over the world. Children want to actually hold a book in their hand and to open it up. You know, children are very tactile. You know, they like touching things, holding things. They like to clutch the book to their chest. I think if you want children to read, then you have to provide them with paper and cardboard books, because it's all very well to say, oh, they can read them on their phone, but they don't read books on their phone. You know, they send each other messages and look at videos and whatever they do on their phone, what we all do on our phones, but most people do not read books on the phone. The other thing, of course, about reading a book is it's an act of concentration. And as we know, you know, the phone is not something, it interrupts you all the time. That's how it works, you know, that's why it's so sort of fun, because you're always being interrupted. But in a way, you can't read a book if you're always being interrupted. You know, and whereas if you have a sort of paper and cardboard book that you don't need to plug in, that won't be popping up messages on you all the time, and you just sit somewhere and open it up, somewhere quiet where, you know, you're not going to be disturbed, and open it up, and then you can really sink into that act of reading. And I think that's something you have to practice, actually. You know, like if you're on the phone all the time and then you see a book, you were going to find it hard to start to concentrate on that book because you're not used to it. So it's something you have to practice. It's like, you know, anything in life, it doesn't happen automatically. It's something you have to learn to do. Well, look, I think daydreaming actually is a fantastic way to start a story. And certainly as a child and as an adult, I do an awful lot of daydreaming. And it's almost like you're seeing the story in your head like a movie. And it can just go any way you like. And then the challenge is you've got to sit yourself down and get those thoughts come out of your head, down your arm, into your fingers, into the pencil and onto the page. And that's sometimes a little bit harder. But I think if you start with the dream, then you really want to tell other people the dream. And the only other way that, you know, the only way that lots and lots of people are going to know about your story is if you write it down, and then anybody can read it. Whereas if you keep it inside your head, none of us will ever know. So I think dreaming is a great beginning for any kind of story, even if it's a realistic story or a crazy fantasy story. Just keep dreaming.
Lovely. That was